Good afternoon, Internet. Hello and welcome. We are live with what I believe is episode 137 of Voices of Revival. We are joined this afternoon by Brady Shearer. Brady, thank you so much for being a part of the cast this afternoon. If you track our roots back to the beginning of the podcast, you were one of the very first guests we had on. So I am incredibly appreciative of that. I think it was episode 12 when you were previously on. So I greatly appreciate you kind of like stepping in at that time and also being willing to hop back on here with us this afternoon. For those who may be unfamiliar with you, would you kind of just care to take a few moments and introduce yourself to the peoples?
Sure thing, and congrats on north of 100 episodes now. No small feat for any podcast. So, big ups to you. Yeah. So I run an organization called Pro Church Tools. We formed in 2014, so it's been about 10 plus years now, and really all we do is help churches navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. So I kind of got my start as a media director at a church plant. I was in school getting my degree in theology and youth ministry to be a youth pastor. Got started at this church plant as the media director, and I was learning all these new fun skills in the world of creative ministry. And as I was learning them, I figured, hey, other people will probably need to learn these eventually. And so I started teaching everything that I was learning at this blog, prochurchtools.com, which eventually became its own podcast. We're getting close to 1,000 episodes there now on the Pro Church Tools show. And we've just been teaching everything that we've been learning ever since.
Very nice, very nice. I've got a couple questions here, a couple things to run by you. Before that, though, 2014, Pro Church Tools started in 2014. Over 10 years. When when it was starting out, the vision, did you anticipate it becoming what it currently is? What were your thoughts early on when it was kind of just starting out?
When I was just starting out, I really just wanted to find a way to, provide for my family. I was newly married.
Yeah.
So the company officially formed as a corporation in 2014. We were about to hire our first employee, but the existence of Pro Church Tools predates that by a few years, but just like in an unofficial sole
Yeah.
proprietor form, essentially. And so in those early days, I didn't really know too much about the online world. I guess you could say it was also brand new for everyone at that point. And so it was my best man at my wedding who was like, "Hey man, like you should start like a blog and like write about what you're learning." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he actually like helped me get the domain name. I didn't even know how to buy a domain name in like circa 2011 when we first got it. But the this all coincided with me being in my third year of Bible college, newly married. And so my wife was working two jobs. She was doing insurance during the day and retail at night. We were living in the most northern major metropolis on the continent, which is Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, which is like 6 months of winter and just like everyone drives a truck and the plows never hit the roads. It's just like, this ice chaos empire that you have to navigate in the winter. And so I was mostly just like, okay, I don't think I'm going to be a youth pastor. I don't think I have the relational bandwidth for that, but I really love the idea of working with churches. That's really all I've ever wanted to do. And so maybe there's like an intersecting point between the world of creative and digital and church, and I could help kind of like, serve in that role. And so that was kind of like the origin of the idea. And in the early stages, like, I don't know, I was just like, maybe a person will read this blog post. We're a team of 30 now across multiple divisions. We have an office in the States, we have an office here in Canada, and, I don't know, 500,000 followers across all of our platforms, I think. Like, it's the other day, Bradley, I posted an Instagram carousel. The title was Rules for Church Photographers. And like within 2 weeks, it had 1.8 million views. Like every single one of our carousels on Instagram is getting like close to, if not more than a million views. Like if you had told me in 2014 there will be 1.8 million humans that care about church photography, I wouldn't have believed you. Much less like my ability to one day within a decade reach those people for free and they have interest in that. So no, like no concept for what this could have become. At the very beginning, it was like I just wanted to not brick my WordPress site every time I installed a new plugin.
Yeah, it's wild. That's wild. God has truly given you guys a platform, and what God is doing is cool. There's not a lot of people that are out there trying to like teach how to operate within excellence in the vein that you guys are cultivating. Um, we have had, so this podcast here, like Voices of Revival, we've had close to 100 different guests now. Um, that episode that we previously did with you back at episode 12, something happened after that episode that has never happened with any other guests we've had on. Random people came up to me like, Brad, I seen you had Brady Shearer on, and I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's never been a thing for anybody else. So yeah, people listen, man. You guys
Wow,
are
very
doing
cool.
something very, very special. um, you guys are champions of ministry in the digital space. Um, when it comes to this, when it comes to taking social media and using it as a tool for the kingdom of God, using it as ministry, I have seen over the years a lot of people villainize it. And I myself, as someone who tries to use like digital as a means to like spread the gospel, I feel like the majority of conversations I see within church spaces almost villainize it, and it's, for the most part, I don't really think that it is approached in the degree that it should be. I don't think people treat it as proper ministry when they should. What are your thoughts? Like I've observed over the years, it's almost villainized. What are your thoughts on this?
I wouldn't say that's unique to digital ministry. I think that as humans, our, gross natural default is to find anything that is unfamiliar or unknown. We just treat that with concern.
Yeah,
And you can go all the way back to the printing press and before and find literature, find statements about like, oh, books, it's going to be the end of civilization. Radio comes along. Well, that's it for us. TV comes along. It's over. The internet comes along. No hope for us now. Social media comes along. This is the one that's going to do it. AI comes along. All right, finally, this is what's going to do it. And look, maybe one of these things will finally do it. And it's not to say that these different mediums don't have their strengths and their weaknesses, the ways that they bring good into the world and the ways that they bring harm into the world. It's not meant to be, well, my statement's not meant to be dismissal and just, say, hey, all things are like the same. Um, you know, Xenophobia exists. We treat people that are different from us poorly because strangeness is interpreted as harmful and dangerous, and that's just kind of our default state. And so if you think about it through that lens, if you are dealing with senior leaders or beliefs and opinions about digital ministry that treat it as like problematic, if you can come at it from that angle, understanding that, hey, this isn't unique to what you're passionate about, this isn't unique to social, to web design, to digital ministry, to AI, whatever it might be, it's just kind of like the default position we have. That makes it a lot easier to deal with and a lot easier to have conversations about, I think.
very well said. Um, you People villainize what they're unfamiliar with. They villainize what is unknown. Um, we live in a world, this media age, this digital age we live in, it is rapidly evolving. It is rapidly evolving, and kind of in the tail end of everything you said there, you referenced AI. Uh, talk about something that like people want to villainize. A lot of people want to villainize AI. What do you think? Like the so I use AI like all the time, all the time. I use AI for everything practically. Um, I feel like I have safeguards in my usage of it. What are your thoughts on having safeguards within the use of AI? How do we properly utilize such a tool?
Yeah, so there are different applications for that, of course. There would be applications for young people. There would be unique applications for church and creative ministry. And then there would be unique applications for personal use. On the church front, one of the kind of policy items, one of the principles that we have is that we will not use AI as the original source of anything. So I'm not going to ask AI to like write anything from scratch. One thing I will use AI regularly for is, let's say this morning, I wrote a script for a video that I'm recording. And then I put that script into AI and I said, hey, chat, GPT, use this script, do not create anything new, and just summarize this into a cheat sheet using headings and bullet points and brief descriptions. And so it took my, 2,000 word lump sum article, and within a few seconds, it had formatted it into this nice cheat sheet. And so I copied the cheat sheet, I pasted it into a new document, I read through it, I made changes where I didn't care for the wording that it used, and then that was done. So that would live within the policy of what I find acceptable in terms of creative ministry and AI. It did not do something that crossed the line for me. It didn't create anything new.
Yeah.
It took existing source material and it helped me format and organize it. And right now, that's the utility for AI that I find the most useful. Basically, just reformatting and organizing. Or I do find it useful in how it summarizes search queries, and it can basically index, a large amount of information that previously I would have had to gather on my own by going to, okay, I'm going to go to Reddit, read a few things. I'm going to go through the first few items that, grab my attention in page one of Google. And then I am going to use my own digital literacy to compile and comprise all that information and then come to a conclusion. And now Chat has done a pretty good job of doing that on its own, and I'm finding it's becoming more reliable. But Claude has also proven time and time again to inject its own ideas that may or may not be linked to reality or any form of truth, and so you always have to like treat it carefully. And that was true, with any new tool. All these new tools, they promise these amazing things. To use social media as an example, the social media marketplace is a remarkable invention, unprecedented in human history, that, any human can have access to tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people. Statista has more than half of all humans on Earth being active on social media. So, like, that's a remarkable thing that's possible. So what are the trade-offs? What are the downsides of that? And being aware and having a sober mind when it comes to both of those things, I think that's the sign of a mature leader and someone who's able to use these tools for good while not letting these tools use us. And that's a big part of AI and digital literacy for young people. We're seeing young people become quite enamored with these tools because they can share their feelings with them, and then the ChatGPT can, in its own voice, respond to those feelings and basically tickle our ears, to use some scriptural language, with whatever we want to hear. And that shapes worldview, that shapes behaviors, that shapes decisions. And so, in the context of student ministry, which again is kind of where I first got my start, that becomes a big consideration. How can we instruct and demonstrate good digital literacy and digital hygiene, is what we kind of like to call it, for our students, so that they're not being used by these platforms and formed more by these platforms than by the Word of God?
Yeah. Let me ask you this. So, as somebody who's your job is like media ministry within church, so you're doing all kinds of stuff for all kinds of different churches. This is your world, right? This is the world you live in. When you look at all of the everything with AI, and I know you just kind of you just shared like your best practices with it, how you use it, stepping outside of the way you use it, what would you say is the most concerning thing for you within the presence of AI?
Well, I wouldn't pretend to be the type of person that knows like, hey, what is like, the future in terms of like, is AI
Yeah.
going to like, rule us with its intelligence? So in terms of like what's available right now, to me, it's the last bit of what I said there,
Yeah.
which is like using chat as a replacement, whether as a child or an adult, a minor or an adult, for a pastor, for a family member, for friendship, for God. Like formation and discipleship happens in the context of real community. And this is probably an important thing to say. I should say this probably on every podcast appearance is like, yes, I spend my life in the world of digital ministry. Like that's my vocational emphasis. But I am not one of the people that believes that digital can take the place of in person. Like ministry is incarnational. That is the example that Christ set for us, where like, he comes into our world. And the same is true for discipleship. That's where that takes place. Digital is a springboard. That's the language that we like to use. But social is a springboard. It is an amazing tool for reaching wide. It's not the tool that like reaches deep and connects deep on those most human, most important levels. That's where real face-to-face, in-person interaction takes place. And one of the great, I think, tragedies of the current generation is that, we're living more isolated lives than ever before. We're doing a lot of things less. We're not abusing substances. We're not sleeping around. We're not like getting into like alcohol. We're not, okay, great. But everyone is like, alone and all the dudes are just sports gambling because we're all sad and by ourselves. And so, like, we have our own issues. And something like ChatGPT becomes this counterfeit, artificial, literally solution where I don't need to like come to grips with the mess of real in-person relationships where I have to like bare my soul in a way that actually makes me vulnerable and opens myself up to hurt because that is kind of like the trade that must be made in any real relationship. I can just get whatever I want to be said to me in a human sounding voice. And it's not like our brains are able to like, negotiate the difference between those two. In fact, one's much easier than the other. We see that in terms of like, pornography. Why would I, as a man, work to like have a real relationship with a woman in the context of marriage and then that lead ultimately to that end goal? No, I just like, open a browser. So like when things become that much more easy and the substitute for something real has no friction whatsoever, like, okay, what are most people going to do? We're just going to take the road of less resistance. What is the fallout of that over years and years and years? We don't know yet, but in 10 years, we'll have a grip on it. Maybe in 5 years, however long, a couple generations. That's what I would say concerns me the most.
Yeah. Well said. Very well said. As you were kind of sharing, my mind goes back to a podcast I had seen some time ago. The podcast featured one of the leaders from the Asbury revival, and this leader was kind of talked about like when things first kicked off with it, and he kind of like talked about the way it affected the city they were in, and also kind of just talked about like the day to day of it and like the kind of like issues that came up within it. And as he was talking about it, he was talking about how there was there were times early on when like people like flocked into the place where they were, and like God was like moving in the room, and in the mix of God moving in the room, he was talking about how there would kind of be just like groups of people that would like kind of flock around each other, and they would all just begin talking and they would begin fellowshipping. And he talked about how the leaders kind of governing over it had a discussion amongst himself, and it basically boiled down to, what do we want to do about this? And ultimately the decision they came to was to let it be. And his like thought process on it and kind of like the reasoning behind it was, they felt like what God was doing in their community, it was a revival of human connection, and like all of these like young people were like flooding there, and in the mix of everything that God was doing, it was God weaving all of these people together, with them doing life together. um, so that's kind of where my mind went with that. um, so let me shifting the conversation a little bit. I'm curious your thoughts on something. So, as someone who, like me personally, like I try and use media, and use it as a tool to share the gospel. I'm always trying to find different creative ways to go about things. In the mix of everything that I do, um, a setting of scripture that I often reflect on and think about. And it doesn't even like, you could read it, and I think a lot of people could read it and wouldn't even directly apply it to media. But when I reflect on it, I weigh it heavily. I consider the words of Jesus where he's teaching and he's talking about, don't let your left hand know what your right hand does. And he's teaching and he's talking about how there are people who they pray openly to be seen, and in being seen, that is their reward. In this digital age, it's like we put our best self forward, you know. And I often wonder how much we're like those Pharisees that pray openly to be seen. Now I'm always kind of like weighing my heart and probing the question to myself: why am I posting what I am posting? Why am I doing what I am doing? What are your thoughts on kind of operating in a healthy way to where we do what we do not to be seen, but for God? And there's probably a million ways you could go about responding to that. What comes to mind for you?
I think that's a really good insight, and I think, when I'm scrolling on social and I see a creator, maybe they have like, if I'm coming across them, I'm probably seeing like their most viral post. And so I just click on it and I think about like, okay, if you're the creator, you publish this like any other post. And this was the one that like brought in all of this new audience and all the metrics and the likes and the comments and the new followers. And, that type of thing can be intoxicating because essentially you're putting your creative work into the world. You're bearing your soul in some ways. And then you're waiting to see, like, what does the public square say about me? Do they say I'm good? Do they say I'm worthy? Do they say that I am deserving of love and praise? Or are they going to ridicule me? And depending on the platform, I think like the negativity can be suffocating in a lot of ways. And I, at least for myself, have been pretty insulated from that because of the subject matter. Yes, I deal like within like the category of religion, which is like highly inflammatory when it comes to comments and discourse. But because of the vertical within that overall category that I occupy, which is communications and digital ministry, and most of my content is tutorial based, instruction based, case study based. That makes it hard for people to get like really angry. So the point I'm making here is like I don't get like a ton of like toxic negativity. I made a post the other day and I was talking about, how to connect with new visitors in church. And the subject matter of the post on Instagram was like, hey, I don't think you should just like give away a mug with your church's logo on it. I know we all do that, but here are some like alternatives that churches have done that I think probably are better expressions of your church's mission and make a better first impression on that guest. And anytime you say don't do something, it tends to draw a lot more attention because a negative spin on something will always be more effective than a positive spin. And so, like, I got a few negative comments on that, like people being like, who cares, bro? Or like, what about preaching the gospel? Nobody like cares about this. So, I'll make disclaimers in my content and be like, hey, this isn't the end of the world. This is just like one thing to consider. Um, but I think one expression of what you're hitting on, which is like, how do we like keep ourselves accountable to not like letting our soul be taken from us? And how do we not act like the people that Jesus is describing in the scriptures? One of them, for me, that I practice is not reducing the hooks of my content to what I know will be most effective if I know that what is most effective will prey upon like the bad side of humanity. So what I mean by that is I saw a meta-analysis being circulated on X the other day, and basically it had indexed, I think millions of social posts. And the conclusion was with every like emotional or moral laden word that's added, and that was the language I believe the meta-analysis used, emotional or moral laden word, like metrics go up by a certain definable percentage. And so like the big takeaway there is like if you want to be seen, you need to be negative. You need to be hyperbolic. You need to be sensational. On X, there's an entire like world of engagement farming accounts, and all they do is post rage bait, outrage bait, whatever it might be, because they know that we cannot resist that content. And Twitter, X will literally pay out money based on the views that you get. So it's like, hey, here's how to print money. Here's how to do it. It's proven. Either you do it or you don't do it. And sure, like there's a lot of competition in there because like it is a clear path to making something happen. But for me, like I'll look at my content, I'll evaluate it and say, okay, if I'm getting too negative, like I can't have every post being like, don't do this, or like the three things you should never do, or because that's just like, even if it is probably what will be effective, it's not like the mindset or attitude that I want to foster around my content. I want you to like come to my teaching, my education, my videos, podcasts, and content and be inspired to do something that will improve something. I want like a light bulb to go off in your head and be like, oh, okay, that's how I could make an improvement here. I want to solve problems. And if I only come at that from the negative, that's antithetical to the values that I have. And so like at the core of my answer to you on this question is like, what are your organizational values? What are your personal values? One of my personal values, and all of my values I have except for two. So I think I have eight. I have 10 personal values. Every one of them, except for two, is tattooed on my skin somewhere. I have a full leg sleeve. For those that are listening, I'm holding up my arms right now because they have a couple of tattoos. Like, I'm not saying you should go get tattoos of your personal values. I also have one written on a chalkboard wall. The chalkboard wall can be erased, okay? Like, there are other, physical emblems that you can have that embody your values. But one of them is every good thing. And the definition for that is pulled from Philippians. Whatever is praiseworthy, whatever is noble. The idea there is like all the good things in the world. Jesus saying, I've come to bring life and life abundant to its fullness. Like, that's what I want for me and for my family and my loved ones. Well, like, if I look at the content I'm producing and every single one of them starts from like a negative hook, well, I'm not being true to myself. And so at the end of the day, do you have values for your organization, for your church, for your ministry, for your personal life, for your family life? Those at the end of the day become the foundation for evaluating your decisions and holding you accountable to the person that you claim you want to be.
You referenced these personal values you have, and you talk about them like they are a guiding light in the mix of what you do. How does how does one go about developing values in their life? Like I don't know a lot of people that if I went to them and was like, hey, what are your personal values? I don't know how thought out the answer would be for a lot of people. For you, like what was the process in developing these personal values?
For me, every value has come from pain or come from a
Yeah.
problem, come from a challenge, come from a difficult season where, one of my beliefs is that like God will keep putting challenges in front of you until you learn the lesson he wants you to learn. And so like for me, I would go through a season and I would realize, okay, like I had to learn how to navigate this. And I think the healthiest way to navigate this type of thing, anchored to scripture, looks like this. And so then out of that came a value. And then it was that value that helped me navigate through the next difficult season. The great thing about being a follower of Jesus is that we have like the ultimate set of values in scripture and we
Yeah.
have the ultimate example in Jesus. And so I think like everyone listening that would identify themselves as like, yeah, I'm a follower of Christ, you have values. To me, I think like the next step from there is making them personal to like your unique DNA and your unique circumstances and your unique responsibilities. Um, and so the way that I write them to provide a brief framework is I have like the value itself. So like every good thing is the value. I have a scriptural anchor. So that would be like, Jesus saying, I've come to provide life, life in its fullness. And then I have a description. Now, in the example here, that description is also another scripture reference, Philippians, all that is noble and trustworthy and, praiseworthy. But sometimes my descriptions will be like taken from fiction or storytelling. I feel like that to me provides like color to the value, that it's not just like words on a page, but it has like texture and it has like emotion. So like a few of mine will just be like direct quotes from like J.R.R. Tolkien. And that will be like the description. And that's meant to like embody like this storytelling of like what this looks like in the face of like battle or what this looks like in the face of real despair or real challenge, hard decision making. And so like when I teach this to people, I don't tell them like, by the way, by the end of the week, I hope you have your set of personal values.
Yeah.
Like organizational values, I'll hand them mine in creative ministry and be like, hey, if these feel like a good fit for you, install them in your ministry. Great, you'll love them. But for personal values, those have to be like earned, I think. And you earn them through difficult seasons. One of my other values is we can get through anything. And that was from a season where like my wife and I were having some troubles. We got married really young, 21 years old. The amazing thing about getting married young is that like you get to build your life together. We were just like two very broke, very like, immature, inexperienced kids. Like, I mean, prefrontal cortex not fully developed until, 25-ish. Like we're 21. Like we are like infants, basically, it feels like now, looking back now at age 34.
Yeah.
And so the great thing about that is you get to build your life together. And when you build something, you're like, I was here and you were here the whole time. And we became like each other. The downside of that is that when you're not really a full human yet, you have tremendous ability to harm others and you harm the people that are closest to you. And so we're going through this like difficult season. And eventually we just had to look each other in the eye and say, you know what? We can get through anything. And that became at the beginning just this like prophetic promise to like the world and to each other. And then on the other side, it became this like earned statement that we had like forged together. And so when the next difficult season came and we said to each other, we can get through anything, that meant something. It wasn't just words on a page, it had been lived out previously. And that's what makes values so powerful. In the context of like church and team building, the language you use becomes the culture you build. That also applies to your family life and to the kids that you're raising and to your spouse. It applies to your personal life. When no one's looking, how do you choose to live? What are you ultimately accountable to? And so next time a difficult season comes, my wife and I look each other in the eye and say, we can get through anything. And we know that we can. The great thing about having your values anchored in scripture is that you know from the beginning, they're anchored to truth.
Yeah.
When we're a young married couple trying to figure things out, what do I believe? I believe ultimately in the way of Jesus and that anything that is dead can be brought back to life. So it doesn't matter how fractured a relationship is, how dark the season looks right now, anything that's dead can be brought back to life. That's the fundamental promise of the gospel. All can be resurrected and redeemed. Okay, great. If that's true, then we can get through anything. And then once we've done it, we look back and we have that saying that we can say to each other that's anchored to, something true, way beyond us.
It's very powerful, very powerful. And there's so much that we could unpack there. I'm curious. You kind of like shared about your values there, and thank you for being so transparent with that. You talk about it like they are a living thing, ever growing. Like you earn your values. How do I want to word this? So with like this podcast, we've had the opportunity, like through this podcast, we've had the opportunity to kind of like step forward and do like host some regional events local to where I am, and like this podcast has really like opened the door for it, and like God has done a lot that through this that was just completely unexpected. And like when first started this podcast, there was really no like grand scheme in mind, no grand plan in mind. But God just kind of began to add little by little, brick by brick, and things have evolved, and things are like there's now like a nonprofit, and all of that behind it. There's a board behind it, and like discussion that like we've had internally is like we've posed the question of like what are our values, and like we've gone through like the process of kind of like defining those things, and through that process there was kind of I remember this moment where we had a list of values, and someone said to me, Brad, we should shorten these values and kind of have less, so they're more like concise, and like it just kind of rolls off the tongue a little bit easier, you know. So like as we were kind of building out these organizational values, um, it was almost like you want to limit it, you know. But you're over here talking about your personal values, and it's like ever growing. Um, Comparing your own personal values to like the values of like the organization you run, um, would you say that like the organizational values are ever growing and living in the same way that your personal values are? And how have maybe your personal values affected the organizational values? And I know this is kind of a rabbit trail, so my apologies.
No, they definitely affect each other, because, I am the one who writes the values and
Yeah.
I am just one person. And so, my worldview and my perspective is going to filter through, of course. I think that, so personally, I have 10 values. Organization has five-ish. And I always say that the values are a living document. I don't anticipate every one of the values I articulated in my 30s serving me in my 60s. I can't say that for certain. Maybe they will all stay the same. But I also think there's merit to what that person was saying to you, going back to my earlier axiom, the language you use becomes the culture you build. You know, making a value memorable is important because the more memorable it is, the more it will be used because the language is easy to recall. Like it's simple, but one of our organization values is say the quiet part out loud. I cannot tell you how many conversations have begun with a person coming to me and saying, like, in the interest of saying the quiet part out loud. That value is easy to remember, and the language you use becomes the culture you build. And so, because that language is easy to remember, it gets used frequently, and we have built culture in our organization on the heels of that. Like, hey, we're not going to let bitterness or resentment have any type of like root in a relationship. We're going to uproot that, and we're going to do that by speaking plainly with love, but we're not going to like try to present something that we're trying to say but not really say what we want to say. We're just not going to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think that they're a living document. Yes. You don't want them to be unlimited because if you have, 38 of them, you probably won't be able to remember them. And two, like how much of a cornerstone can something be if like a cornerstone by definition in like construction, there aren't that many of them. They are the cornerstone. If everything's a cornerstone, then that's not how you can build something. And so, limiting them definitely matters. I mean, 5, 10, whatever it is. I recently did my evaluation of our values to basically be like, okay, are all these serving us still? Sometimes the value itself will stay the same, but I'll like rewrite the definition a bit to make it more, yeah, just make it more current and relevant. Oh, okay, we've learned X, Y, and Z. And then we have had organizational values where I've like said, you know what, this is no longer a huge big deal. We can delete this, and I've introduced a new one. So
Very cool. Very cool.
if you do get it tattooed on your body, I recommend you keep it around though. Probably useful.
That would be a good thing. That'd be a good thing. That'd be a good thing. Um, as we approach the tail end of this, one final question. One final question for you. A little bit off topic of the discussion so far. Um, what are your thoughts on how to develop an organic presence? And like what I mean by that, how do we operate organically? And I'm not wording this good. I think about like we've all seen like a reel that is done online, like a church does a reel, and then like every church there is copies that reel and remakes that same reel. How do we operate in a way where we're developing our own organic presence and we're just not a carbon copy of what everybody else is doing? How do we find originality?
Yeah, I mean, obviously values play a big role. We've already covered that.
Yeah.
So my other thought has to do with, okay, what about style expression and aesthetic expression? One of my beliefs is that there was a mini web series that I was introduced to when I first got started in this in like 2010. It was on Vimeo. It was called Everything is a Remix. And, the idea was there is nothing new under the sun, and everything is a re-expression of something else. And that's one of my fundamental beliefs about creativity, in that, like, does anything original truly exist? Like, is there such thing as a self-made man? No, like we're all the products of the things that we've seen and read and consumed and the people that we hang out with. And so for me, when you're developing like your voice, or you're developing your creative style, or you're working to develop like how you write, at first, the best that you can do is find someone that you look up to and just try to be a bad carbon copy of them. That's how like every person starts. Like people look up to Scorsese and they say like, I'm going to make movies like him. And you're bad at it compared to him. But like that's an inspiration that you see something in. And then eventually, a few years later or a few months later or whatever, you find another influence and you start to like talk like them in your podcasts, or you make social posts that look like them. And then you do that a third time and a fourth time. And eventually you've been at it long enough and you've been working long enough that you're kind of your own voice at that point, and you're a summation of all the other voices that have influenced you along the way. And the great thing about publishing on the internet is that every time you publish something, you get unvarnished feedback in the form of attention and time spent on what you post. So for me, I've greatly tailored the content that I make based on how people respond to it. Okay, when I post about this topic, people seem to really like it. Great, I'll publish more on that. That was one of my interests among many, but people seem to really care about this. I'm going to talk more about that. So long, again, as it doesn't, go against my values. And like, this is a really simple process. I think it's the way that every single creative person develops. And I don't think there's any shame in it either. So yeah, like just copy someone you like. Like I did this when I was a kid. We didn't really, all we watched in my house were like sitcoms growing up. So I eventually like convinced my parents to like let me watch The Simpsons by like sixth grade or something. They had resisted it for a long time. They didn't think Bart was a good influence on the father-son dynamic, which was, almost certainly true. And my parents really liked Friends, the sitcom, and Seinfeld. And so like those were like shows that were playing in my house as a kid. And so like my sense of humor was developed from like watching Chandler and like his like gregarious like movements and sarcasm, or from like watching Jerry Seinfeld and his like dry delivery. And like my cadence and sense of humor at first were just like copies of that, because I was like, I find that funny, and in a real life conversation I would end up like parroting that. And then eventually, like, again, it just becomes this confluence of all these different influences in one. So just don't feel bad if you're like a carbon copy at first. The first project I ever did in church was I looked at a video that City Church had made, which is Pastor Judah Smith's church. And they had made this really cool video with this distinct style. Keep in mind, this is the first video I ever made in church. And it was this like special type of time lapse called tilt shift time lapse that makes every single thing look like these miniatures because of the motion blur or lack of it, and the edges of the frame being blurred. Anyway, the first video I ever made was a carbon copy of that video, except the city was Edmonton instead of Seattle. And like my pastor was like, "This is amazing. You like did this thing." And I was like, "Yeah, like I didn't come up with the idea, but I copied like another visual style, and I learned from that." And then you just repeat that over and over and over again.
Very, very well said. Do you still have that video, that first video you ever made?
Yeah, it's unlisted on our YouTube channel.
Nah,
so like
you gotta
it's still stored there.
make that public. You gotta make that public.
No, no, then everyone would be like, it's a great story, right? Like you
Yeah.
hear the story and you're like, wow, that's a great story. And then you see the video and you're like, oh my God, that's what you made. But they would say it was like 2011, right? We got 2009, something, a long time ago.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Um, Brady, thank you so much for your time. I am genuinely appreciative of you being here. So thank you. I greatly appreciate it. I greatly appreciate um, all of your feedback and everything you have to share. Thank you. You have been an immense influence on my life in the mix of everything that I do on my end. So I thank you. Those who hung out with us live today, thank you. Those watching via replay, thank you. And until next time.